On the afternoon of June 2nd, 2015, the massive stone walls of the Grand Canyon swallowed a professional river guide in the blink of an eye. At 22 years old, Morgan Heimer was completely at home in the wild, a skilled, safety-conscious raft guide who knew the rough rapids and tricky terrain of the Colorado River inside and out. While working a commercial river trip for Tour West, Morgan and his group pulled their rafts ashore at mile 213 to explore Pumpkin Springs, a warm limestone pool right off the river's edge. It was a routine afternoon stop meant for swimming and relaxing, but as the guests began heading back to the boats, Morgan stepped around a rock outcropping. Today, we are looking into the sudden disappearance of a seasoned river professional from the canyon floor, where a simple shore stop turned into a decades-long mystery. The area around mile 213 and Pumpkin Springs is a tight network of steep limestone cliffs, slippery rock ledges, and deep, muddy river eddies. The canyon walls press directly down against the Colorado River, leaving almost no natural paths or escape routes out of the canyon. Morgan was easy to spot that afternoon. He was wearing a bright blue life jacket, a dark water shirt, and carried a standard guide rescue whistle. As the guests finished swimming and began loading back into the large inflatable rafts, Morgan was seen walking along the rocky shoreline. He was doing a standard guide sweep, checking the area to make sure no gear or passengers were left behind on the rocks. Witnesses last spotted him at roughly 4 p.m., standing on a limestone ledge just a short distance from the water, looking out over the river. Yet, this small, sun-baked ledge would be the last place anyone saw Morgan. When the trip leader called for final boarding just minutes later, Morgan was gone. Despite being surrounded by dozens of passengers and fellow guides in a very tight space, nobody heard a splash, a cry for help, or a whistle. In less than 5 minutes, a man dressed in high-visibility safety gear had simply disappeared from a rock platform, leaving a group of confused onlookers staring at an empty riverbank. The immediate alarm raised by the river crew triggered a fast response from the National Park Service, but rescuers were instantly met with a total lack of clues. Because Morgan was wearing a professional, high-buoyancy life jacket, a standard drowning scenario didn't make sense. A life jacket is designed to keep a person floating high on the water's surface, even in rough rapids, making it highly unlikely he would get trapped underwater at that specific spot. Furthermore, Morgan was a highly trained whitewater professional, certified in swift water rescue. He wasn't a tourist who would panic in a current. He knew how to read the water, handle strong undercurrents, and swim defensively to survive dangerous river conditions. If he had accidentally slipped into the river, his training would have immediately kicked in to keep his head up and alert his nearby co-workers, rather than allowing him to sink silently without a trace. Park rangers used helicopters, rescue boats, and dive teams to search the Colorado River for miles downstream from mile 213. They focused heavily on the deep currents, rocks, and log jams where a floating object might get caught, expecting to see the bright blue flash of his life jacket against the muddy green water. Yet, despite days of intensive searching, the river turned up absolutely nothing. No floating gear, no lost water shoes, and no sign of a body. With the river yielding no clues, investigators shifted their focus to the steep cliffs that line Pumpkin Springs. The terrain rising away from the water is a rough maze of loose rock slopes, steep limestone cracks, and narrow canyons that lead deep into the desert backcountry. It is a very unforgiving landscape where an unprotected hiker can quickly get trapped or fall into a hidden crevice. Investigators guessed that Morgan, perhaps looking for a higher view to take photos or scout the river ahead, had tried to climb the steep cliffs behind the springs. If he had lost his footing on the loose, crumbling rock, A fall into an unreachable crevice could have hidden him from the sight of search helicopters and ground teams. This theory gained traction as searchers moved from the water's edge to the high ledges above mile 213. However, this land-based theory didn't match Morgan's extensive backcountry experience. As a seasoned Grand Canyon guide, he had a practical understanding of desert survival and the fragile, crumbling nature of canyon rocks. He knew that climbing steep, loose limestone walls alone in slippery water shoes was an unnecessary risk, a basic mistake that a safety-first professional simply wouldn't make. Furthermore, a fall down those rocky slopes would typically leave behind scuff marks, loose gravel, or torn clothing, yet the cliffside remained entirely undisturbed. As the weeks stretched into months without a single piece of physical evidence appearing, a different theory began to circulate among the river guiding community. A few people suggested that Morgan may have intentionally used the remote environment of the canyon to stage a voluntary disappearance, swimming across the river to hike out on a remote backcountry trail. This idea relied on the thought that an experienced guide, who knew the canyon's hidden trail networks, could potentially find his way out to the rim undetected if he wanted to start a new life. The concept offered a small glimmer of hope to those who knew him, suggesting he might still be alive somewhere. Yet, for his family and co-workers who knew his deep passion for guiding and his close relationships, the idea of Morgan abandoning his life and his passengers in the middle of a trip didn't make sense. Ultimately, the Runaway Theory fell apart against the brutal geography of the Grand Canyon itself. To walk out from mile 213 on foot requires a multi-day, grueling desert hike through unmarked, waterless backcountry that regularly claims the lives of fully prepared hikers. Doing so without a backpack, survival supplies, or proper hiking boots is nearly impossible, leaving investigators right back where they started, staring at the muddy waters of Pumpkin Springs. Years after Morgan Heimer stepped behind the limestone rock at mile 213, his disappearance remains one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries in the history of Grand Canyon National Park. He was eventually legally declared dead, a formal designation that did nothing to answer the lingering questions at Pumpkin Springs. The investigative file remains open, a collection of witness statements and empty maps that offers no closure to his family. The real tragedy of Morgan's story is how quickly the canyon moved on. The Colorado River continues to flow through mile 213, its muddy waters carving deeper into the stone. Every summer, hundreds of commercial raft trips pull their boats ashore at the exact same limestone ledge, where passengers laugh, swim, and take photos, completely unaware of how quickly a life was lost right where they are standing. Morgan's final moments remain a mystery. Whether he suffered a sudden accident hidden within the cliffs or was swept under by a freak current in the water that overcame his life jacket, he disappeared in a heartbeat. Today, the canyon remains completely silent about what actually happened on that June afternoon.